Welcome to the Malek Clinic for Natural Healing, where we offer forward thinking solutions for your health. This is one of our public lectures that we offer every third Thursday of the month in the office, and that we will shortly be starting to stream via the web for anyone that cannot make it that would like to watch these educational talks. So, before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Nadia Malek. I am a chiropractic physician. I'm board certified in clinical nutrition. Now, I've been in practice for over 30 years, and probably over 21 of those have been in the field of natural and functional medicine. And I have my own story to tell with that. But because of that, I focus on chronic illnesses. And what that means is that I look at things that just have been lingering in there for a long period of time. Stuff like thyroid and hormone dysfunction, or gut issues like GERD or reflux, or any other type of gut problems, autoimmunity and immune dysregulation. I also like to work with DNA, so DNA nutrition. We pull out the methylation pathways and the detox pathways, and I work with anxiety and emotional responses. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and you can find me at drnadiamalek.com. I currently live and work in the Lake Worth area, and I have clients that are both local, and I also work with clients remotely, meaning that if they happen to be out of the state or out of the country, we certainly can do phone and Skype consults. So that's that. And before we actually get started on our webinar, let's go ahead and sort of review a little bit of a disclaimer here. And that is that, you know, I encourage you to seek your medical advice before you undertake anything that is new or different, because self-medicating is not a wise move, and the following information is not a substitute for medical counseling. It's not intended to diagnose, to treat, or to cure any medical condition. And if I should mention any nutrition or nutritional supplements, they have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. So let's go ahead and get started. This is about the hidden addiction. This is where you'll learn how your food could be fueling addictive behavior. So this is a quote that I thought was just perfect. To eat is a necessity, but to eat intelligently is an art, by La Rochefoucauld. And I think that in today's world, most people eat mindlessly. You don't really pick and choose what you're putting in your mouth very often, and you're going to see as we proceed why that is and can be a very dangerous thing in terms of your health and well-being. So I'd like you to consider this. Think about your food choices, because they may be hurting you more than you may think, and your external environment may be damaging your internal environment. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what do you mean my external environment? You mean like the world around me? Yes, but I also mean the world inside you. And what I mean by that, it's your gut, because your gut starts with a hole in your mouth and it ends with the hole in the anus. So there's a tube running through those two holes. Yes, it might be convoluted, but it's still a tube. It goes from one end to the other, and it's your outside world, because your mouth is exposed to the exterior, your anus is exposed to the exterior, and whatever it is that you bring in from the outside winds up going through that tube and comes out the other end. And that is why there is such a tight junction or barrier between the gut and your internal environment. And by your internal environment, I mean your bloodstream, your circulatory system, and all of your internal organs, your glands, everything that is not within your gut. So when I say your external environment may be damaging your internal environment, I'm not just talking about what's outside your body, but also what goes into your gut or into your body. So we're going to start by defining an addiction. And this comes from the American Society of Addiction Medicine. The idea that addiction is characterized by an inability to consistently abstain, impairment in behavioral control, and craving. Now, how often have you thought, wow, I'm craving something, right? I'm craving that piece of cake, or I'm craving those peanuts, or I'm craving something. And how many times have you thought to yourself, well, I'm gonna really watch what I'm gonna eat now, so I'm not touching these foods. I'm not gonna eat any more crackers. And then it's calling your name in the closet, going, eat me, eat me, right? Well, that kind of describes addictive behavior, wouldn't you say? Especially in light of the fact that it is the definition of addiction, the inability to consistently abstain and a craving. So, what does that have to do with food? Well, I just kind of told you a little bit about what it had to do with food. But let's kind of look at some documentation here or some paperwork. So this is an article that was published in the New York Times Magazine. It's called The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food, and it was published back in February of 2013. And this was an article that was written basically about a meeting that took place in 1999. Now we're in 2015. So 1999, we're talking what, like 16 years ago? So this is not new information, ladies and gentlemen. This has been around for a long time already, and even further along than this. And here's what was discussed. The article discussed junk food as a culprit in obesity. And interestingly enough, that was discussed in a meeting by some of the top CEOs and some of the top food companies, things like Kraft, Nabisco, General Mills, Procter Gamble, Coca-Cola, etc. All of the CEO met together and they were literally shown a presentation about the dangers of junk as a culprit for obesity. And the result was basically that nothing was done. So, in fact, the head of General Mills, who in fact had the most to lose because General Mills literally has the cereal aisle monopolized and they sell Yoplait. And of course, we all know how healthy yogurt is, yeah, right? So, interestingly enough, what the article said was because of yogurt's well tended image as a wholesome snack, sales of Yoplait were soaring with annual revenues topping $500 million. But those sugary, yogurty type foods are not the healthiest thing in the world. And yet, because we think yogurt is a healthful or a healthy snack, rather, we don't stop to think, oh, hey, maybe this is not so good for me. So this gentleman said, don't talk to me about nutrition. Talk to me about taste. And if this taste tastes better, then if the stuff tastes better, rather, don't run around trying to sell stuff that doesn't taste good. Now, to me, I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like I don't care what you say, I'm still going to continue to put that food there, even if 100% of the nation becomes obese. The other article that I'm going to kind of go through is the Scientific American article that discussed obesity as an addiction. And the underneath that it says new brain research is revealing why fats and sugars may be driving more and more people towards obesity. Interestingly enough, the very first sentence in the article is would a rat risk dying just to satisfy its desire for chocolate? Well, the article goes on to show that studies show that overeating revs up the reward systems in our brain, so much so in some people that it overpowers the brain's ability to tell them to stop eating, even when they've had enough. So there is no shut off switch. No shut off switch. As with alcoholics and drug addicts, the more they eat, the more they want. So, does that sound like an addiction? It certainly sounds like an addiction to me. I don't know about you. So, what is the biggest culprit? What is the problem and why do people get addicted? Well, the biggest culprit is sugar, and it's sugar in all its forms. Now, this is one of my favorite movies. Unfortunately, it absolutely touts the use of sugar to make the medicine go down. But I don't know about you, but I love that song, but not so much the sugar part, right? So let's talk about sugar. What is it? Where do we get it? How important is it? What does it do? And can we survive without it? So we're going to start by defining sugar in the literal sense. And this comes from the Sugar Association. So, when you think of sugar, and most people feel that way. I mean, most people kind of see sugar in that sense. Because when they think of sugar, the first thing you, of course, think of is that spoonful of sugar that's going to make the medicine go down, right? That nice heaping spoonful of sugar that you're mixing in your coffee or your tea, or the sugar that you're putting in your pies or your cakes or your cookies. It's that nice white granulated stuff. And in fact, the Sugar Association agrees with you. It is, in fact, sucrose. And sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose in a 50-50 ratio. Now, sucrose can come from a variety of sources. The most common sources are sugar beets and sugar cane, and it contains approximately 15 calories per teaspoon. So that doesn't sound like much, right? It's not caloric, doesn't seem to be calorically rich, but that's not the problem with sugar, and you're going to see as we go on. And we're going to kind of talk about what sugar really is. Now, is that really true that sugar is just sucrose? Well, not really. It is a sweetener. Any sweetener is sugar. Not sugar in the literal sense, but it is sugar. And in that, it sweetens and it causes issues. Sugar is a carbohydrate. So carbohydrates come in two forms. They come in complex sugars and they come in simple sugars. Table sugar or white sugar or sucrose, or what the Sugar Association labels as sugar, is a simple sugar. Something, say, like a carrot would be a complex sugar. So sugar comes in a variety of forms. And we're going to talk about the many faces of sugar, and what you may not know could definitely hurt you. And it's interesting because, like I said, most people consider sugar being the table sugar, right? The white powdery stuff that you put in your coffee or your tea, like I said earlier. But here's sugar. What's sugar? Well, it's anything that has an O. So sucrose, for sure, that's your white table sugar, is sugar. But so is glucose, so is fructose, so is maltose, dextrose, galactose, lactose, anything that has an ose behind it, any kind of sugary additive or condiment. Honey is a type of sugar. Corn syrups and corn solids are sugar, and you'll see a lot of those in a lot of foods, especially prepared and processed foods. Molasses, fruit juice. Now, very often I'll see, for example, certain foods that would normally be made with sugar are made naturally sweetened. And I've got air quotes going around the naturally sweetened with fruit juice. Well, fruit juice is still sugar. It's just more fructose than it is glucose, but it's still sugar. Maple syrup is a sugar. Treacle, malt, including barley malt. Beet, of course, where we make sucrose, cane juices and solids, where we make sucrose, dextran, diastatic malt, ethyl maltol, and the list goes on until we hit, oh, and agave nectar. How many of you think agave nectar is a health food? Think again. It is definitely not a health food. And of course, the granddaddy of them all, high fructose corn syrup. High fructose corn syrup is actually not 100% fructose. It's typically it tends to be 40 to 45% glucose and 55 to 60% fructose. But it's just that much sweeter because of the fructose. That's the thing about fructose. Fructose is much, much sweeter than glucose is, or even table sugar for that matter. And we haven't even talked about the other things that are sugar hidden in a vegetable like a potato, for example, the white potato or corn. I mean, I've been to restaurants where I'll ask, I'll order, for example, say a piece of fish or whatever piece of animal protein I'm eating, and then I want a vegetable, and they'll say, well, we have corn. And I'm thinking, corn is not a vegetable in my book. Technically it is, but it's really not. It's more of a grain. And it's really a starch. I don't want that. Do you have broccoli? Do you have cabbage? Do you have Brussels sprouts, right? So hidden in what look like a vegetable are sugars. Breads, pastas, crackers, cookies, flour, any kind of flour product, any kind of starch is sugar. And in the sense that it creates what we call a glycemic load in the body, meaning that it really kind of pushes your own blood sugar and your insulin production as well. So how important is it? How important is sugar and what does it do? Well, glucose, and I'm talking glucose, I'm not talking fructose, I'm talking glucose, is a fuel used by the mitochondria to make energy as in ATP. And every single cell in your body has the ability to use glucose for energy. The most expensive the most expensive organ in your body in terms of energy production and fuel utilization is your brain. And that is why imbalances in blood sugar create such a problem in terms of brain function. It's because the brain does not do well when there's not enough fuel for it to run. Okay. But in terms of glucose utilization, it's pretty important. I mean, every cell in our body uses it, and it is used to make energy. Now, can we live without it? Well, beta oxidation is our body's ability to burn fat for energy. And we burn fat in the same cycles and the same biochemical pathways that we burn glucose in, just a little bit differently. In fact, UC Davis Chemwiki says the best source of energy for eukaryotic organisms are fats. That would be us. Glucose offers a ratio 6.3 moles of ATP per carbon, while saturated fatty acids offer 8.1. So you can see in this whole chemical jargon, if you just focus on the numbers 6.3 and 8.1, glucose 6.3, fat 8.1, 8.1 is better than 6.3. We actually do a better job and we make more energy from fats than we do from glucose. So the question is, can we survive without it? Or would the question be more, do we want to survive without it? Well, we really have to think about that because sugar is a huge problem. So let's talk about this little bit of research that was done a couple of years ago. Back in October of 2013 is when it was published at Connecticut College, where a group of students and faculty took a bunch of Oreos and they fed it to lab rats. And what they found was America's favorite cookie is just as addictive as cocaine, at least for lab rats. And just like most humans, rats go for the middle first, which I thought was funny. But really and truly, you want to kind of look at this more seriously. Because here's what happened. Connecticut college students and a professor of psychology found America's favorite cookies just as addictive as cocaine, which was just said. They also found that eating cookies activated more neurons in the brain's pleasure center than exposure to drugs of abuse. Drugs of abuse. I mean, we're talking things like heroin and cocaine and crack. So you're telling me that a cookie with sugar in it is going to be more pleasurable than the drug cocaine? This is exactly what they're saying. In fact, they're saying our research supports the theory that high fat, high sugar foods stimulate the brain the same way that drugs do. And it may explain why some people can't resist these foods. Back to the addiction, right? Even though they know that they're bad for them. So even though we associate significant health hazards in taking drugs like cocaine and morphine, high fat, high sugar foods, and that's fat and sugar together, may present even more of a danger because of their accessibility and affordability. It's not like you can go out and buy cocaine without going to jail, but you can go out and buy Oreo cookies anytime you want. They're right on your supermarket shelf along with hundreds of other varieties of different fat and sugar loaded foods. So, is this a problem? I would say it's a really big problem. And here's an article from JAMA that was published in April of 2014. Added sugar intake and cardiovascular diseases mortality among U.S. adults. And what this article finds is that most U.S. adults consume more added sugar than is recommended for a healthy diet. And what was observed from that was a significant relationship between added sugar consumption and increased risk for cardiovascular disease mortality. You eat a lot of sugar, your heart disease risks rise substantially. Okay, and here's the worst thing about this is that consumption of added sugars remained high in US diets, especially among children. Do you know that we're actually seeing adult diseases in children today? I mean, things like type 2 diabetes, things like cardiovascular problems, things like cholesterol or dysglycemic problems. I mean, children are not supposed to be ill. They're supposed to be healthy, having a wonderful, happy, healthy life. And yet, diet and the fact that they're consuming so much sugar is cutting their lives in half, basically. So it is definitely something that's negatively impacting our health. Here's an article that was written in a magazine, in actually Nature magazine, back in February of 2012. And one of the authors here is Robert Lustig, and he's been a very outspoken advocate of basically banning sugar. He thinks it's a toxic substances. And one of the things that he says in this article is in many parts of the world, people are consuming an average of more than 500 calories per day from added sugar alone. As a result, chronic diseases have outpaced infectious diseases as the most expensive burden on the world economy. We used to think that this was just a USA issue, but it is not. It is a world issue today. And here we can kind of take a look and see how the world is being impacted. And this is from the year 2007, rather. And so you can see calories per day of glucose or sugar, rather, consumption. And unfortunately, the United States and Alaska, it's well over, they stopped counting 600 calories per day of their diet is sugar. So let's say somebody eats a diet, excuse me, of anywhere from 1700 to 2000 calories per day, fully probably more than a quarter of that diet is sugar. And so all of that sugar is having to be processed in their systems in a body that can only handle so much. Is it any wonder that people are sick today? And we're not alone. I mean, look at it's all over the world. Some of the better countries in terms of their sugar consumption are some countries in Africa and most of Asia. China and India, etc. But most of the third or the first world rather countries have high sugar consumption. So it's really important to start looking at your food because all of that sugar consumption has really done a number on people's health. Look at that. For example, in the United States, and this is for the Center for Disease Control, back in 2009, there was actually a block for less than 10% body mass index. Less than 10% was that light blue one. In 2013, that doesn't even exist anymore. Now it's the smallest or the least problematic is 15 to 20%, 15 to less than 20% rather. We've kind of skipped all of the blue blocks from 2009 and we've directly moved into the whatever that is, flesh colored or peach colored block there, 20 24%. I mean, it's crazy. People are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's becoming more and more and more and more of a problem. Take a look. We're not alone. All around the world, the USA being unfortunately one of the worst. But look at the problems in Chile. There's issues in Iceland. There's weight has been rising throughout the years from 1965, if you will, up to 2005, with the US basically taking the lead at the percentage of the people that being overweight. This is in 2005 of 35%. Today in the United States, the percentage of people being overweight is close to 70%. 70%. That's a huge problem. It means 30% of the population, less than a third of the population at this point of time, is normal weight. How terrible is that? Look at this. The prevalence of obesity among low-income children aged 2 to 4 years. This is from 2011. Imagine, in some states, in 4 states, over 16%, and that's over 16% of the children in that age group are obese. I mean, that's unconscionable. This should not be occurring. We're talking children here. These are not adults. Look at the projection of diabetes burden through 2050, the impact of changing demography and disease prevalence in the United States. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. The number of Americans with diagnosed diabetes is projected to increase 165%, 165% by the year 2050, with the largest percentage among older adults, those that are 75 or older, but it's prevalent among all. Look at white males, 158%. Look at black males, 363%. This is a real problem. Absolutely real problem. In 2005 to 2008, Look at the National Diabetes Fact Sheet. Based on fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C, 35% of US adults aged 20 years or older had pre-diabetes. We're not even talking full-blown diabetes. Now we're talking things like insulin resistance, hyperglycemia. These conditions predispose the individual to diabetes. And here was another kind of a really scary statistic. Fully half of adults that are aged 65 or older have this issue, have this pre-diabetic situation. And I see this all the time when I look at blood work. I see hemoglobin A1C at 5.8, at 5.9, at 6, at 6.1. I see glucose levels at 100, at 110. These are pre-diabetic situations, triglycerides that are over 150 or 200. We're looking at the beginnings of syndrome X or metabolic syndrome. This is a very prevalent situation, and all because we're giving in to our addiction. In fact, you know that in the United States, for example, the population is fat phobic. In fact, most people tend to eat low fat or fat free foods because we've been told that fat is bad for our heart and we need to not consume fat so that we can reduce the risk of heart disease and reduce the risk of MIs or myocardial infarctions or heart attacks. Well, take a look at this chart. This chart actually shows us that lowering the consumption of eggs, lowering the consumption of butter, somewhat lowering to kind of leaving stable the consumption of animal fat, has not done anything at all to decrease heart attacks. Heart attacks have been rising incrementally while our consumption of healthy fats have been dropping incrementally. There's definitely something wrong with this picture. And this is something that we all need to think about as we're making our choices for food. So a decreased consumption of butter and eggs, unchanged consumption of animal fats, no significant impact. In fact, worse. And and guess what? We're eating more vegetable oil because we're told that that's better for us. Not at all. Not at So what happens when we take the fat out of the food or the fiber or we increase the shelf life of the food? What happens when we think we know better than nature? Because that's exactly what's happening. Throughout our entire history, the human race has had balanced meals. We've had fat in our diet. Natural, we've had tons of vegetables. We've had animal fats in our diet. And granted, we might have been we had a lot of wars or a lot of conflicts or whatever that might have killed the population at a young age. But today, with our diet, with our man made diet, we're creating a nation of sick people, sick and obese people. So the question is, do you get the picture? Since the advent of low-fat, high-sugar diets, our chronic diseases have continued to rise to astronomical heights. And we have to remember that our body can't handle these types of diet because we only, for example, in our pancreas, we only make so many beta cells. Those are the cells that produce insulin. So when you think that only 1 to 2% of the total cells in the pancreas are actually beta cells, can you imagine just that 1 to 2% trying to process all the sugar that we eat in our diet? And the other thing with low fat diets is they're depriving our systems of all of our fat soluble nutrients. Plus, fat is necessary for so many metabolic and protective functions. And as I showed you earlier, fat is a much better fuel for our cells than sugar, than glucose is. And in fact, it is the preferred fuel for our heart. So why would we stop eating something that is really good for us and instead substitute it with something that is literally hurting us? Also, protein is very important, and yet we notice that for most of the time we're encouraged to eat more grains, we're encouraged to eat more non-protein foods, when in fact protein is essential and necessary for every metabolic function in our body. And what's the price that we've paid? Well, cardiovascular damage, belly fat, specifically with fructose consumption, Leptin sensitivity. Leptin is a hormone that is produced by our fat cells that tell our brain when we've become satiated. In other words, when we're full. And when we develop leptin, when we become desensitized to leptin, just like we become desensitized to insulin, what happens is that our brain no longer responds to that signaling. It no longer responds to the leptin signaling, and there's no more shut-off switch. So we don't know when to stop eating. We just keep eating and eating and eating and eating and eating. So leptin sensitivity goes very much hand in hand with insulin issues as well. More cancers, less survival rate. Cancer loves sugar. In fact, PET scans, I don't know if you're familiar with PET scans, but PET scans are tests that are done to determine if cancer has metastasized to different parts of the body. The way PET scans are done is you're given a sugar mixture to drink, and then the 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 imaging machine follows the sugar because we know that where the sugar goes is where the cancer lives. So of course, with all that consumption of sugar, it's increasing cancer, it's decreasing survival rate, causing liver damage, specifically non-alcoholic fatty liver. That's a disease that is basically, we see alcoholic fatty liver where alcoholics tend to have livers that are fattier that can lead to cirrhosis, but we're seeing this condition in people that are not alcoholics, people that are not even drinkers, if they're consuming large quantities of fructose. Memory issue, cognitive decline, and we've seen huge rises in Alzheimer's and dementia, faster aging. Sugar is definitely not anti-aging. Decreased life expectancy, and one of the obvious, very obvious issues is obesity. And and in terms of even the way, as I said earlier, that we're told to eat, has anything really even changed? Take a look at the traditional USDA pyramid. This is going back about maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Look at what we're told to eat most of: 6 to 11 servings of bread, of cereal, of rice, of pasta, flour, sugar based foods, 3 to 5 vegetables, 2 to 4 fruits, and then our fats, which we should be eating healthy fats, are up there. And we're told sweets, eat sparingly. But what about all of those 6 to 11 bread, cereal, rice, and pasta servings? That's not sweets, that is, in just a different form. Now, a more current one, I don't see how anything has changed, do you? My pyramid, steps to a healthier you. Again, we're told to eat large quantities of grains. Okay, so maybe the vegetables look a little better. And the fruits, well, fruits are still sugar. But again, look at your oils, that little sliver of yellow. And then dairy products, and then meats, that little purple sliver. Hello. I mean, we're totally denying our systems what they need to properly function. And then, of course, choose my plate. Okay, choose my plate where I'm sorry, I don't really see much of a difference. Do you? We still have grains predominantly taking up, most of the dish there, along with vegetables and proteins and fruits, and then, of course, the dairy. Now, Harvard tried to do a better job, and I have to admit that, at least they stuck the oils in and they put water instead of the dairy, which was really good, and they make you eat more vegetables, but the grains are still there. Okay, the grains are still there. So we're still looking at tons of sugar. Instead, I would say that grain section should be smaller than the fruit section, but there you have it. So, what can you do? Well, you need to get proactive about your food and your beverages. And most importantly, when you're shopping in the supermarket, you must read your labels on anything that you're going to ingest. In other words, if you're getting ready to purchase something, flip that box, bag, can, whatever it is, and read what's in it. Because trust me, you don't know what's in it because if for example it says 0% trans fats in there, flip it and make sure there are no partially hydrogenated oils in there, because the food industry is allowed to put 0% if it's less than 0.5% trans fats in a food, and you're still thinking you're eating something that's good for you when you're not. So be conscientious about that. Read the labels. Obviously, eat as close to nature as possible. The fresher and more real your food, the better. Choose organic foods when you can. If you go to a website called the Environmental Working Group or EWG.org, they actually have something called a food list that lists in order of toxicity approximately, I think it's over 50 different foods that tells you what's the most sprayed to what's the least sprayed. And number one is the most sprayed. And if you haven't already guessed what's number one, take a wild guess. What do you think number one is? Apples. So if you're going to eat apples, don't eat conventional apples. Make sure you get them organic. Instead of soda, drink water or herbal teas. Herbal infusions not only taste really good, but a lot of them are actually good for you. So, choose wisely and please make sure that you get fats, healthy fats, things like extra virgin olive oil, things like unrefined organic virgin coconut oil, oils that are going to nourish you. Coconut oil, in fact, has mid-chain triglycerides in it. These fats have been shown to improve cognitive function and brain health. So eat fats. You need the fats to, number one, burn as fuel, but more importantly, you need them to help support your metabolic activities, to help keep your skin healthy, to help keep your brain and your nervous system healthy. Without fats, we cannot survive. So definitely get those healthy fats in. And then this is my healthy plate. This is something that I think is super important and in the way that you eat. So in terms of vegetables, actually they should cover half your dish, not a quarter, not, a little less than a half. It needs to fully be half your dish. And by vegetables, I'm talking about things like green vegetables like cabbage and broccoli and kale and asparagus and leafy greens like Swiss chard and things like Brussels sprouts. All of those are so healthy for you and so beneficial for your system. They do so many wonderful things for you. Proteins. There is no complete protein in the vegetable world. If you wanted to be a vegetarian, you would have to ensure that you get all of your protein by really varying your foods. But if you eat a piece of fish, or you eat an egg, or you eat a piece of meat, you're going to get the complete spectrum of protein or amino acids that your body needs to survive. Without those, you cannot make your hormones, you cannot make your brain chemicals, you cannot make skin, you cannot make organs, you cannot make bone. You need protein. So don't, please, 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 don't shirk having protein in your diet. You don't have to eat the side of a cow, but at least get the animal protein in. You need fats. You have to have a healthy amount of fats. I'm not saying to eat a stick of butter, but get those healthy fats in. And butter, actually organic butter or not organic, preferably, obviously, is one of the healthiest foods you can eat. Coconut milk, like I said earlier, olive oil, those are all healthy fats that are nourishing, that are good for you, that are nutrient rich for you, and provide your system and especially your nervous system and your brain with what it needs. When I talk about a healthy starch, I'm talking about things like sweet potatoes. I'm talking about things like beets. I'm talking about things like turnips. Those are the kind of starches that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about things like pasta or rice. I'm talking about things like lentils. Lentils are actually pretty good and they're very low on the glycemic scale. Colorful salads. By colorful salads, I mean a mixture of different lettuces, things, that all different green lettuces that are going to give you a variety. uh, Cucumbers, red peppers, if you're not sensitive to nightshades, that is. Just make your salad really colorful. Now, if you're going to put cruciferous vegetables in your salad, like broccoli or cauliflower or anything like that, then or Brussels sprouts or cabbage. I don't know why anybody would want to put that in their salad, but if you do, then cook those first because cruciferous vegetables have goitrogens that can impact your thyroid health. So cook them first and then go ahead and add them to your salad cold. So colorful salads are a wonderful way to get more healthy nutrients and enzymes into your body. And it's perfectly okay to cook your vegetables, by the way. Cooking just neutralizes your enzymes. But if you kind of have a nice colorful salad, you get plenty of enzymes there. And the cooking process also neutralizes some of the nastier side effects of vegetables. For example, in cruciferous vegetables, it neutralizes the goitrogens that can impact your thyroid health. So it's perfectly okay to cook your vegetables, just don't cook them to death. Don't like make them into mush. Cook them until you've basically just taken a little bit of that crunch out. So you can steam them, you can saute them, but just take that crunch out, and that helps to really kind of pre-digest the vegetable for you. It helps you to break it down more easily. And bear in mind that human beings do not make the enzyme physiologically that breaks down the cells, the vegetable cell walls rather, which are cellulose. We don't make cellulase. So chewing our vegetables really well, par cooking our vegetables or pre-cooking our vegetables before we eat them really well, not really well, but steaming them will help us pre-digest them and open up that cell wall to be able to access the nutrition that's in our vegetables, as well as get that fiber going to feed our healthy probiotic population. And fruit. And fruits are optional. You don't have to have a fruit. Fruits and vegetables are very similar in their nutritional uh, makeup. So if you're eating a good contingent of vegetables, you don't really need to eat a whole lot of fruits. And if you do choose fruits, pick the ones that are lower in sugar, like your blueberries, which are very good for you because they're loaded with proanthocyanidins. Okay, so remember that your health, that is your choice. So really think about what your next choice is going to be. And when you eat, make the right choice. Thank you for listening. Have a super day, and I hope to see you next time.